300 years ago, the Scottish were known for being a frugal people. They lived in a land that was not very fertile. It wasn't like other parts of the world, or especially England, where they had lots and lots of crops to work with. So the Scottish had to work with what they had, and at times they struggled to survive. They had certain kinds of food that there was their go-to, oatmeal specifically because it was fairly easy to grow in that area, and another grain that they really leaned upon, which was barley. Now, we don't talk a lot about barley today, and barley is a great product. It was very popular in the time period, and it is popular today for brewing. It's where you get the malt from and the sugar that turns into the alcohol that is beer. But barley is also important for other things. Now, wheat gets very expensive in the 18th century because of certain kinds of crop failures, and barley starts to step in the 18th century and replace wheat in things like bread. But there are other places where barley is so much more, say, potent as a food source, and that is barley in soups. There's even a reference to a book about the poor in the 18th century, and he says that they start making barley bread, but they would be much more efficient for these poor people if they used the barley in soup. Barley was also very important to the candy industry, where they made barley sugar, which is kind of a hard candy, and barley water, which was a very important drink for cooling down people in the summertime and also for feeding sick people. And that sort of relates to what happens with barley. Barley acts a little differently than a lot of the other grains that are similar to it, oats or wheat. If you put barley in water and you boil it, it thickens up and becomes a jelly. And this idea really creates a very thick kind of soup when we use it in that circumstance. It becomes so very filling and very nutritious at the same time. During the late 1700s, as the urban population of Great Britain began to grow by a great amount, there were problems with feeding the poor. And the writers of the time period, the food bloggers of their day, were looking for solutions. And they began to look at how the poor survived in places like Scotland and in other parts of Europe or even in North America. They were searching for solutions. And one of the solutions that they were suggesting was barley. Specifically, how the Scotch had been using barley in the earlier part of the century. The living experience in 18th century Scotland was very difficult. They were living in an environment with a lot of political strife and unfair living conditions. This drove a lot of them to emigrate to North America during the 18th century.
To take a closer look at some of these things John is talking about, but using food, we're going to use a classic Scots barley broth. This is a really interesting recipe because we see it change over time, and we see other cultures that are begging and borrowing from it, and they're taking it and giving their own spin, which kind of makes it into something that it was never meant to be. This is survival food. This is stick to your ribs. This is get you through the day kind of food. And then we see it morph into more of a high table, elegant kind of thing that doesn't make any sense whatsoever, but we'll get there in a little bit. Today's recipe comes from Elizabeth Cleland's cookbook, A New and Easy Method of Cookery from 1755. To make Scots barley broth, boil a huck of beef in 8 pints of water and a pound of barley. On a slow fire, let it boil to 4 pints. Then put in onions, pepper, salt, and raisins if you like them, or you may put in greens and leeks. What we're gonna do here is cut this recipe in half. I'm gonna use a gallon of water. We don't need to feed that many people. And obviously, I called a couple of butcher friends. I could not get a huck of beef. So I do have a cut of beef, and that's what we're gonna use today. It's gonna be just fine. This one's about 2 pounds. So we're gonna cut this up, and we're gonna get this boiling. And it's not really gonna have to boil too briskly, but it does need to boil down by half, is what the recipe calls for. So it's gonna take a little while. We've got our beef all sliced up. It's over here in the water, and it's cooking. Once we get a little bit of movement to that water, I'll add the barley. And then after that reduces some, it calls for raisins if you would like, or greens or leeks. What I have with me today is I have a little bit of raisins. I've got some celery, and it does call for onions. So we're gonna get some onions in there. This is all gonna cook together, and this is going to be our meal. This is a very simplified version of this meal, and this is what the Scots were eating. This is sustenance, this is survival food, this is getting through the day. Now we see this recipe morph over time. When we see it in English cookbooks, all of a sudden it's kind of got a fancy air to it. And I was looking at those recipes, I almost did one of those recipes today, but it's just a little too much, and it's kind of not even the same thing that it started out as, where in those recipes you add carrots and you add a bunch of different herbs for a lot of flavor in this broth. And then at one point, you take the beef out completely, you don't even eat it. It's just there to make a broth. And then it gives you the option to take a whole fowl and put that into the soup. And it turns into this really fancy, almost like chicken soup with some celery in it, which completely gets away from the whole reason that people were eating this food in the first place. So we want to stick to this lowly dish where people are eating just to get by. Our barley broth is ready, and it looks and smells really fantastic. I was surprised. You know, sometimes barley can get a little gelatinous, and it's not doing that, but it did thicken up the broth, which it needed. So much of the juices have kind of been extracted out of the beef, and it looks like it's a really rich, nice broth. The celery and the onions are cooked down, and then you got little raisins just chilling in there. And I have no idea why, but I can't wait to find out how great that is. So I need a raisin and the beef and one bite. There we go. Ready? Let's see how this stuff is. It smells awesome. Man, okay. So the raisin's just giving you this little pop of fresh sweetness. The celery is still crunchy. The meat's a little chewier. I think I could cook it a little longer. I waited to put the barley in a little bit because I didn't want this to be one jelly mass. So yeah, I think I could have cooked the beef a little longer before I put the barley in. But it is really good, and it could be better by prolonging the cooking of the beef. But don't do it without the raisins. The raisins, something special in there. I think it makes it. I really do. I think it's nice. That crunch of celery is really special, and it's nice. Kind of brings the whole thing together. And this is a nice, savory, homey meal. Nothing kind of up in airs about it. It's just wonderful to have anytime that you want at home. If you're feeling like you need to warm up a little bit, or it's like the last days of winter kind of moving into spring, and it's like I'm still gonna get some soup in. This is the one. This is really good. I know you will enjoy it. You should try it at home.